Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Please consider subscribing and check out our Patreon for more. Enjoy the video. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. Eliza, I know my behavior today was odd, and I know I have a lot of explaining to do, but the truth is, I'm going through something right now, something big, and I'm not quite sure how to deal with it yet. Eliza sat back, surprise flickering across her usually inscrutable face. I see. And does this something big have anything to do with your job performance? No, Mark said firmly. I can assure you my personal issues won't affect my work, but I could really use some discretion as I try to sort things out. He held his breath, waiting for Eliza's response. Would she press him for details? Fire him on the spot for his erratic behavior and vague explanations? But to his shock, Eliza simply nodded slowly. All right, I'll trust that you have things under control. But Mark, she fixed him with a stern look. If your personal issues start bleeding into your professional life, we will be having a very different conversation. Are we clear? Crystal, Mark managed, barely able to believe his luck. Good. Eliza stood, smoothing her skirt. In the meantime, I expect you to be the model employee. No more dramatics, no more distractions. Just good old-fashioned Burger Barn service with a smile. Think you can handle that? Absolutely, Mark said quickly. Thank you, Eliza, for understanding. Eliza waved him off. Yes. Now go get cleaned up and back to work. We've got a lot of hungry customers out there wondering where their favorite burger mascot has run off to. Mark hurried out of the office, his head spinning. He couldn't believe he'd just dodged that bullet. But he knew Eliza was right. He couldn't let his personal crisis interfere with his job any longer. He had to find a way to deal with this, and fast. He was so lost in thought as he waddled down the hall, he almost ran smack into Derek, who was coming out of the break room. Whoa there, buddy! Where's the fire? He chuckled at his own joke before his face turned concerned. Everything okay? You and Eliza were in there for a while. Yeah, no, everything's fine, Mark said quickly. Just a misunderstanding. All sorted now. Derek looked unconvinced but didn't push. If you say so. Listen, I know it's been a crazy day, but we're short-staffed for the dinner rush. Tina was supposed to be on register, but she went home sick. You feeling up to manning the front while Jose runs the grill solo? Mark's heart sank at the thought of spending hours on the front lines, so exposed in his ill-fitting new body. But he couldn't afford to raise any more red flags, not after his close call with Eliza, so he forced an approximation of his usual goofy grin onto his face. Sure thing, dear. You can count on me. The next few hours passed in a hectic blur of activity. Mark forced himself to interact with the customers with his characteristic verve, swallowing down his discomfort and anxiety. He laughed too loudly at lame jokes, made exaggerated gestures to the colorful menu board, hammed it up for photo ops with sticky-fingered kids. All the while, his mind raced with unanswered questions and lurking worries. By the time the last straggling customers cleared out and they could finally flip the sign to closed, Mark was utterly drained, both physically and emotionally. He slumped against the counter as Jose wiped down the few tables, breathing heavily through the mesh netting of his burger mask. You all right, man? Jose asked, giving him a curious glance. You seem off today. Yeah, just feeling a little under the weather, Mark lied. The irony of using the same excuse as Tina was not lost on him. Jose shrugged, tossing his rag into the nearby cleaning bucket. You should head out then. I can finish closing up. You sure? Mark asked, torn between relief and guilt. Totally. Go get some rest. I need you in top form for your birthday party shift tomorrow. Mark froze, his stomach plummeting to his toes. In the chaos of the day, he'd completely forgotten. Tomorrow was his, or rather the real Mark's, 25th birthday, and he'd volunteered to pull a double shift running birthday parties to make some extra cash. Birthday parties. the bane of every Burger Barn mascot's existence, wrangling packs of hyperactive, frosting-fueled children, leading them in inane party games, and all the while keeping up the happy-go-lucky burger persona. It was challenging enough on a normal day. In his unsettled new state, he shuddered as he clocked out and dragged himself to the employee lockers to change out of his sweat-drenched costume. Facing a day full of shrieking kids and watchful parents in this strange body sounded like his own personal circle of hell. But what choice did he have? No showing up would definitely raise alarm bells with Eliza and Derek. Mark peeled off his burger suit, sighing in relief as cool air hit his overheated skin. In just his undershirt and shorts, the changes to his body were even more apparent. He stared down at his slender hands, his hairless legs, the gentle swell of his chest under the sweat-dampened t-shirt. It still didn't seem real, didn't seem possible. As he mechanically changed into his street clothes, his conversation with Tina replayed in his head. The desperation in her eyes, the defeat in her voice. She'd been drowning just like he was now, and no one had noticed. No one had reached out to help. Not even him. Well, that stopped now. He may be lost and confused, but he'd be damned if he let a friend suffer in silence. Determined, he fished his phone out of his backpack, only to realize he didn't have Tina's number. He cursed under his breath. They'd agreed to meet up after her shift, but with her going home early. He briefly considered asking Derek for her contact info, but quickly dismissed the idea. The last thing he needed was more questions from his eagle-eyed boss. But he couldn't just leave things like this, not after everything that had happened today. Chewing his lip, Mark shouldered his backpack and headed out the employee entrance, the night air cool on his face. Tina had mentioned something about making rent, about her mom being sick. He had a vague memory of her mentioning her neighborhood once, some complex on the west side of town. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. As he walked down the cracked sidewalk under the amber glow of the streetlights, Mark's mind churned with possibilities. What was he going to say when he found Tina? How much could he reveal about his own impossible situation? He still hadn't fully wrapped his head around it himself. He'd always been the type to keep his personal life and work life separate, clowning around at Burger Barn by day, quietly chipping away at online business classes by night. Despite his outwardly gregarious nature, there was a lot about the real Mark that his co-workers didn't know, that he kept carefully hidden away. But now, everything had turned on its head. His barriers had crumbled, his secrets spilled out like stuffing from a ripped teddy bear. And for the first time, he was realizing just how lonely that self-protectiveness had left him, how ill-equipped he was to handle a crisis of this magnitude on his own. Maybe it was time to start letting people in, terrifying as the prospect seemed. Lost in thought, he almost missed the weathered sign marking the entrance to Shady Pines apartment complex. He looked up at the slightly run-down buildings, the dim windows, the cracked parking lot. Tina was here somewhere, wrestling with her own crises. He just had to find her. Mark took a deep breath and walked into the dimly lit apartment complex, scanning the building numbers. He wasn't entirely sure which one was Tina's, but he figured he'd know it when he saw it. The night air was cool on his skin as he walked along the cracked sidewalk, the distant sounds of televisions and arguments leaking out from behind thin walls. He felt out of place here, a stranger in a strange land. But then again, that's how he'd felt all day, hadn't it? Ever since he woke up in this unfamiliar body, this unfamiliar life. As he turned a corner, a flicker of movement caught his eye. There, sitting on the stoop of one of the buildings, was a familiar figure. Tina. She had her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking slightly. Mark hesitated, suddenly unsure. What was he doing here? What could he possibly say to her? Sorry your life is falling apart. Mine is too. Let's commiserate? But then he thought about how alone she must feel, how alone he felt. and he knew he couldn't just walk away. Gathering his courage, he approached slowly. "Tina?" She looked up, startled, hastily wiping at her eyes. "Mark? What are you... How did you find me?" "You mentioned this place once," he said, shoving his hands in his pockets. "I'm sorry for just showing up like this. I couldn't leave things the way we did. Not after everything that happened today." Tina let out a shaky laugh. "You mean my complete meltdown and almost burning down our workplace? Yeah, not my finest moment." Mark sat down next to her on the stoop, the concrete cold through his jeans. "We all have bad days, and it sounds like you've been having more than your fair share lately." Tina was quiet for a moment, picking at a loose thread on her shirt. "I'm just so tired, of struggling, of barely keeping my head above water. I feel like I'm failing at everything. My job, my family, my whole life." The raw pain in her voice hit Mark like a punch to the gut. He knew that feeling all too well. The feeling of being a disappointment, a screw-up, of watching your dreams slip through your fingers no matter how hard you tried to hold on. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now," he said softly. "But you're not a failure, Tina. You're one of the hardest workers I know. The way you handle those Karens in the drive-thru, I could never." That got a small smile out of her. "I do have a way with the difficult ones, don't I?" "You're a freaking Karen whisperer," Mark said, nudging her shoulder gently. "Seriously though, Tina, you're dealing with a lot. More than anyone should have to handle alone." She sighed, leaning back on her hands. "I'm used to handling things alone. It's always been just me and my mom, But now with her being sick, I'm barely keeping us afloat." Mark's heart ached for her. He couldn't imagine bearing that kind of burden, that kind of responsibility. "Have you looked into any assistance programs? There's got to be something out there that could help, with the medical bills if nothing else." Tina shrugged listlessly. "I've tried, but there's always so much red tape, so many hoops to jump through. And I'm already stretched so thin, I just don't have the time or energy to deal with it all." She looked over at him, her eyes sad and tired in the low light. "What about you, Mark? What's going on with you? And don't say nothing because I saw your face today. Something's up." Mark froze, his mouth going dry. He'd been so focused on her problems, he'd almost forgotten about his own impossible situation. What could he say? That he'd woken up in someone else's body? Someone else's life? She'd think he was crazy. Hell, maybe he was crazy. But looking at Tina, seeing the vulnerability and trust in her eyes, he knew he couldn't lie to her, not after she'd bared her soul to him. He took a deep, shaky breath. "Tina, if I tell you something, do you promise to keep an open mind? Because it's going to sound completely insane." She sat up straighter, her brow furrowing. "Of course. You can tell me anything, Mark. No judgment." He closed his eyes briefly, steeling himself. Then, in halting words, he began to tell her everything. Waking up in a strange bed, in a strange body, stumbling through a day in someone else's shoes, quite literally. The confusion, the fear, the overwhelming sense of wrongness. Through it all, Tina listened silently, her eyes growing wider and wider. When he finally trailed off, she let out a long, slow breath. "Wow, that's a lot." "I know," Mark said miserably. "You probably think I'm completely cracked." But to his surprise, Tina shook her head. "No, I don't think you're crazy. I mean, it sounds crazy, but I believe you, Mark. I can't explain it, but I do." Relief rushed through him, so strong it nearly brought tears to his eyes. "You do?" She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I do. And hey, after the day we've had, a little unexplainable craziness almost seems par for the course." Mark let out a shaky laugh. "Fair point. God, Tina, I'm just so lost. I have no idea what to do, how to fix this." "We'll figure it out," she said firmly. Together. You were there for me today, Mark. Let me be there for you now. He looked at her, this fierce, determined woman who had every reason to give up, but refused to. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, he felt a flicker of hope. Okay. Together. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of their shared secrets hanging in the air between them. Then Tina stood up, dusting off her jeans. All right, first things first, we need a plan of attack. Research, resources, maybe even some outside help if we can find it. Mark stood as well, feeling a new sense of purpose settling over him. Lead the way, boss. She grinned at him, a real smile this time, not the forced customer service one. Oh, I like the sound of that. Okay, let's head to the library. If there's any information out there on spontaneous body swaps, that's where we'll find it. As they set off down the sidewalk, Mark felt lighter than he had all day. The problems were still there, looming large and unknowable. But now he wasn't facing them alone. He had Tina, and together they would find a way through this. They had to. Because the alternative, living a life that wasn't his, in a body that wasn't his, was too awful to contemplate. At the library, they claimed a table in the back corner, away from prying eyes. Tina fired up one of the ancient desktop computers while Mark scoured the shelves for anything that looked remotely relevant. Okay, let's think this through logically, Tina said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. When exactly did you first notice the change? Mark set a stack of books down on the table and plopped into the chair across from her. This morning, when I woke up. Everything was normal when I went to bed last night. She nodded, chewing her lip thoughtfully. So something must have happened while you were asleep. Did you have any weird dreams? Eat anything strange before bed? No, nothing out of the ordinary, Mark said, racking his brain. I had some leftover pizza, watched some Netflix, passed out around midnight. Tina scrolled through a few web pages, her brow furrowed. Well, I'm not finding much on spontaneous body swaps specifically. Plenty on out-of-body experiences, astral projection, that kind of thing. But nothing quite like what you've described. Mark groaned, resting his forehead on the table. Great. So I'm a medical anomaly as well as a metaphysical one. Tina reached over and patted his hand. We're not giving up that easily. Let's broaden the search. Unexplained phenomena, paranormal occurrences, anything in that realm. They dove into the books and web articles with renewed energy. For hours, they scoured and scanned, taking notes and chasing leads. Mark felt like his eyes were going to bleed from staring at small print and glowing screens. But slowly, a picture began to emerge. Whispers of strange happenings, eerie similarities to his own experience. A woman in Oregon who claimed to have swapped bodies with her twin sister for a day. A man in Japan who said he woke up one morning in the body of his deceased grandfather. Look at this, Tina said excitedly, turning her screen so Mark could see. There's a whole online forum dedicated to inexplicable transformative events, people from all over the world sharing their stories, looking for answers. Mark leaned forward eagerly, skimming the posts. Do you think they might know something? Something that could help me? It's worth a shot, Tina said. I'll make an account and post your story. See if anyone has any insights or advice. As she typed away, Mark felt a swell of gratitude. Less than 24 hours ago, Tina had been a peripheral presence in his life, just another coworker slinging burgers. Now she was his lifeline, his ally in this surreal fight. He'd taken so much for granted, he realized. His body, his identity, his relationships. He'd kept people at a distance, never letting anyone get too close. But what was the point of that, really? What was the point of anything if you had to go through it alone? His musings were interrupted by Tina's triumphant, "Aha!" What? What is it? He asked. She turned to him, her eyes shining. I found something. Or rather, someone. A user on the forum calls himself the Shift Master. He says he's an expert in all things body swap related. Mark frowned skeptically. The shift master? Sounds a little on the nose, don't you think? Tina waved him off. Beggars can't be choosers, Mark. And right now, we're definitely beggars in the information department. He says he can help guide lost souls back to their rightful vessels. That's gotta be worth checking out, right? I guess so, Mark said, still uncertain. Did he say how exactly? I'm not looking to get involved in any dark magic or back alley surgeries here. Nothing so dramatic, Tina assured him. He just wants to meet up, talk things through, see if he can offer any guidance. He says he's helped others in similar situations before. Mark hesitated, torn. On the one hand, meeting up with a stranger from the internet sounded like the first 10 minutes of a true crime documentary. On the other hand, what did he have to lose at this point? If there was even a chance this shift master could help him get his life back. Okay, he said finally. Set it up, and you're coming with me. Tina grinned. Obviously. I'm invested now. Plus, I've always wanted to meet a real-life wizard. He never said he was a wizard, Mark pointed out. She shrugged. Shifter, sorcerer, whatever. All I know is he better have a cool robe and a long white beard, or I'm going to be very disappointed. Despite himself, Mark laughed. It felt good to laugh, even if the situation was decidedly unfunny. Thank you, Tina, for everything. I don't know what I would do without you right now. Her expression softened. You'd do the same for me. That's what friends are for, right? Friends. The word sent a warm glow through Mark's chest. He'd spent so long keeping people at a distance, he'd forgotten how good it felt to have someone in your corner. And he'd have Tina in his corner as they ventured into the unknown, chasing answers and clinging to hope. As they prepared to meet the mysterious shiftmaster and unravel the secret of Mark's impossible transformation. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing about this was easy. But for the first time since he'd woken up a stranger to himself, Mark felt something other than fear and confusion. He felt determined. He felt supported. And most importantly, he no longer felt alone. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever twists and turns this bizarre journey took, they would face it together. And somehow, some way, they would make things right again. Thanks for watching. Check out Patreon if you want to have early access to the other parts. If not, it will be online in a couple of days.